used to be a newspaper journalist back in the day. And I had this grand idea of, oh, I want to go travel the world and go meet people from different cultures and societies and such. And I got I thought, okay, political journalism is the way to do that. And so I went to grad school for political journalism. And that pathway really drained me because I had to talk to politicians all day. And that is not where I think my strength or passion lies. I kind of thought political journalism is like an essential stepping stone to being a quote unquote real journalist. And when I realized how the sausage gets made in terms of politics and government and also this sort of very transactional nature of journalism, then I got kind of jaded. And so I kind of segued into tech and am still in tech. But when Gio mentioned San Francisco community nights, I was energized by that because who doesn't like community? And also when he brought the idea of a podcast to me, I was like, oh, this could be really interesting because this is all about conversations with folks who are trying to create community, who are trying to reach out to folks who are looking for connection, who are open-minded about trying different things, different modalities. And so I thought, wow, this is kind of like why I wanted to get into journalism. It's like real conversations about people trying to affect change within themselves and with others. And so it's just been a really beautiful sort of side project going on, just trying it out and see how it fits. And then seeing, okay, if this spark leads, like it doesn't have to lead somewhere, but where else might it lead? What doorways might it open up? And so that's why we're here.
I love that. My uncle Bruce is a prominent Asian American journalist, Bruce Kuhn.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he had a very positive impact on my life because he didn't have his own kids. So I got to use all his press tickets and go to all these sporting events, and he shared a lot of perspectives and I think showed me how to be charismatic and talk to people. So very cool.
Oh, wow. I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about that.
Cool.
What do you mean by charismatic and talking to people? And I guess we could just jump right in if that's okay.
Sure.
You mentioned your uncle, a very famous American and Asian American journalist here in the Bay Area. And you mentioned how he taught you to be charismatic and how to talk to people. What do you mean by that? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, I grew up as what I feel like was the quintessential shy, quiet Asian American stereotype in Fremont, California, which is really funny because Fremont has been known as the best city in America to raise your kids in, happiest city in America, safest city in America. So I was the model minority in the model city. And yet I felt like for most of my life, I had this huge struggle with my own identity, my own self expression, my own ability to be noticed or take up space or any of these things. And having my uncle Bruce, who didn't have any of his kids of his own and was right here in the Bay Area, I was able to spend a lot of time with him. And he provided sort of a counterbalance from what I experienced with my mother and father to a world where he would always be throwing dinner parties and he would take me to my first fancy restaurant and show me the proper etiquette. He'd buy me books on how to be a gentleman, things like that. And actually, yes, I was gifted lots of books and lots of experiences to sporting events. He took me to Cirque du Soleil. He took me to a lot of different things. And he was just like the quintessential cool uncle. And as a shy, quiet Asian American kid, to be able to see somebody that was out there riding a motorcycle and having all this great interactions and having people respond to him in a very positive way all the time showed me that was possible. And it took me a long time to grow into that, but I definitely feel like having that role model as a kid was transformational.
Yeah, I think I got into journalism to be your uncle, essentially, man of society and a man who could kind of go into different venues and different areas and interact with different people in a myriad of ways and just be comfortable. I've never met your uncle, but it just seemed like from his writing and from his journalism, he was just like very comfortable in his own skin and very
Yes,
comfortable interacting with others. And that's just, that just sounds like an amazing person to have in your family.
absolutely. So much so. And at any even family dinners, you would hear the way that he would show interest in everybody, the way that he would tell stories. Yeah, it was definitely really a big deal. And he'd have all these connections to other prominent Asian American journalists like Ben Fong Torres. He'd give me books like The Rice Room and it's signed by him. And then I'd see Almost Famous and be like, whoa, all these different. And then he'd give me like background stories like, oh, Ben Fong Torres is way nicer than they portrayed him in Almost Famous, things like that. It was really cool. Yeah.
Do you still feel like kind of a shy Asian kid at your core, or what's your dynamic with your inner child?
So I feel like my inner child, I actually forgot about that. I had spent most of my life believing that I was a pretty severe introvert until somebody asked me how I recharge. And I definitely, if I'm feeling bad, don't want to be all alone. I just feel worse. I want to be around friends. I want to be around other people. And they told me, then you're not an introvert. And it matched these stories that I heard about when I was 2 years old and on the plane to Hong Kong, walking up and down the aisles, shaking hands with everybody and introducing myself. There were all these stories about me showing up at the playground in preschool and people gravitating to me and me being very social and fun and playful. But somewhere along the road, something happened and I just closed off into a shell and really started behaving very differently. So as I've started to express myself more freely, really been on this journey of self actualization and through that, a lot of self expression, I go back and watch the very first family videos when my dad got a camcorder when we were like 4 or 5, when I was like 4 or 5 years old. And I see myself today a lot more. And it's like, oh, this is who you always have been. This is who you are at the core. But something like society's conditioning or a few memories where people seem to judge you or reject you really just caused me to swing extremely into the other direction. And it's been like climbing back out of a pit, kind of like in Batman Begins, you know? I went to this dark pit for so long, and it's like climb back out and be the hero you were always meant to be.
How does that feel to you when you're climbing back out of that pit? Is it like a discovery? Is it a relearning? Does it feel like coming home? Is it something completely new to you? How does that feel to you to kind of capture or recapture yourself?
It really does feel completely new. And if I didn't have those old family videos that I never watched, all these years go by and I never watched them until my sister decided to convert a couple of them into digital copies and then sent the files. And I was like, okay, let me see that. And that was the part that really just was mind blowing because I have really no recollection of being that person. So everything that I've been able to do, like the first time I was able to rap my own lyrics on a stage at the Boom Room in San Francisco and it was packed, was exhilarating, was terrifying, was something brand new. But there was this gorgeous woman that came up to me afterwards and was like, oh my gosh, you were so good. And nobody like that ever initiated a conversation with me in my life, right? So moments like that where you are stepping into, let's call it your authentic self, and there's appreciation, right? Like they say that you don't want to need any sort of external validation. But now I've made this journey largely into self love, and I found that it's only one half of the yin yang. You can trust yourself, your ability, your intention, your character. But if you don't trust other people to actually be able to see and understand and appreciate it, you can actually feel really great about yourself and feel like if I am that self, the world is going to judge it, attack it, maybe. So it still causes you to want to hold back. And that's something that I've been navigating lately, is trying to get both the inner trust as well as the external trust. And that external trust comes from people receiving you well, people seeing you the way that you feel like you are internally. So I think it's really great to be able to do the inner work and then act from that inner growth and then have some positive reinforcement come back. I think about it as sort of like being like Jackie Chan. A lot of us are trying to climb up to the best version ourselves just on one side, only on the validation side or only on the self love side. But if you try to climb up a skyscraper, unless you're Spider Man and you got really sticky hands, you're going to just slide back down. So I feel like it's jumping back and forth, like Jackie Chan, kick off from one side with some self love, some growth internally, and then bounce off the external validation side with some encouragement. And then you go back into your self love. And that's how you get all the way up to the top.
I want to come back to freestyle rapping
Mm.
in a little bit, but I do want to touch on self love. What did that journey look like, or what does that journey look like to you now? How did the journey towards self love kick off for you?
I think it's a journey that kicks off when you're born. I feel like your whole entire life is a journey into self love. So I think there are key moments where you move forward, you take a big leap, right? But it's definitely something that seems inherent to the human experience and is a lifelong journey. I lost my train of thought a little bit there. What was that?
The journey towards self love,
Hmm.
like a lifelong journey. And I'm wondering if there was kind of a eureka moment where it was
Oh,
like, oh,
yes.
I am definitely lacking in self love, or I think there's a way to cultivate this, and I need to learn how to do this, or like, how did that, was there a spark of realization for you? How did that come about, if so?
Yeah, I think there were a few major sparks. And the spark that we just talked about, going from believing I was an introvert my whole life consciously to realizing I'm actually quite an extreme extrovert, was very huge because it showed me that anything else that I am equally certain of could also be wrong. And as I started to recharge in a way that actually suited me, I started to grow more rapidly. And then came a huge aha moment when I realized that similarly, what I had construed my entire life as primarily an issue of self confidence was not actually so much an issue of self confidence as I'm a really good person. I did really well here. Like, yes, it's not perfect. Yes, there was flawed, but the way that I was received is not proportional to the quality of what I brought to the table. So something else must be wrong. And that's where it became a self confidence issue because I couldn't see it. So I assumed there was something absolutely horrific in my blind spot that was so bad that it was undoing all the good that I brought to the table. Everything that people seem to appreciate wasn't enough, but I can't figure out what the problem is. Like, I feel good about what I did. I feel good about how I showed up. And in that reflection, I started to realize that it was less about not trusting myself and more about not trusting how others would be able to understand or appreciate me. Maybe I was too different. So that helped me to resolve a lot of my issues with my own self confidence and my own self love when I kept looking for that thing in my blind spot and really getting a lot of people's reflections, right? Because that's the best way to find what's in your blind spot, and still not finding anything. And then realizing that, hey, maybe I'm not really at fault here and that there are so many factors going on. And I want to explore that in terms of our fear. But I think generational pain plays so much of a larger role in the world, in every one of us, than any of us really is taught or maybe can fully grasp.
What do you mean by generational pain?
So, a lot of our lens on the world is shaped by the people that are around us. So, for example, when parents see you talking to somebody, like walking up and down the aisles of an airplane, greeting everybody, they may tell you, no, don't do that. Don't talk to strangers. They're dangerous. They're going to kidnap you, right? And a lot of that can come from things that happen to their grandparents or their great grandparents. For example, my great grandfather had a business partner who betrayed him and stole his soy sauce factory. So we were actually quite well off. And then there was this massive betrayal and caused the family to lose so much of its fortune. And that can lead the grandfather into raising their children with a level of mistrust. And when we look at the thousands of years of humanity that have gone by without therapy and other things that can cleanse the slate, I'd say that, let's say a child is drawing with crayon on the wall, so much of the anger in whatever consequence, whatever is absorbed by that child, doesn't stem from crayon on the wall. That's an inconvenience to clean up, but can stem from the way that they were treated by their parents, which can be a lifelong of terrible things happening in war, or the things that have happening at work, which can be part of a system that's been a lot of thousands of years of generational pain leading to that. So there is this massive domino effect. I believe that the Catholic concept of original sin is actually generational pain, and that it is a very real thing that colors our lens and causes us, when we tie in with what's actually going on biologically with our amygdala, right? This very ancient part, this reptilian brain that causes us to believe that we need to be fearful of things in order to survive. Well, our brain hasn't adapted very much in the last couple thousand years, where technology and medical improvements, all these other things make it so that we don't necessarily face death the same way every single day. And we still have the wiring too. So we've got this hyper vigilant fear center that wants to protect us from all the things that are going to kill us, but there aren't nearly as many things that are going to kill us. So we have more time to philosophize, more time to think, more time for the prefrontal cortex, particularly like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, to try to counterbalance that fear response. But it's also like a chaperone that prevents us from things like embarrassment. So when you talk about freestyle rapping, I was part of this container called Flow Fam with a vocal confidence coach in Los Angeles, Gavin Masumiya, another person that comes from the Asian American experience and knows what it's like to tone down yourself so that you don't stand out, so you don't bring embarrassment to your family or things like that. And he really taught me about achieving flow state and how much it comes from being able to shut off that chaperone part of your brain, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, right? So we have two sides. That side is supposed to help us bring rationality to balance out the fear generated by our amygdala, but it often overcorrects and also overprotects us from being able to express ourselves. So it's a very complicated formula that we're dealing with biologically. And then on top of that, we stack the lens that is largely filtered by generational pain and then added onto by our own personal traumas and experiences. And a lot of that is built off of things that aren't necessarily even true, because so much of the way that we perceive the world is very limited.
It sounds like you've, for lack of a better word, and sometimes this is a bit of a cliche, but it sounds like you've integrated a lot of these dynamics, the generational pain, the our natural biology with respect to external stimuli and reacting to it, finding safety in the world. What was that process like? What practices did you partake in? How did you come to a place of integration and recognizing all of these dynamics and coming to a sense of understanding, or I guess peace with them?
So I talked about how my uncle, as a journalist and very charismatic individual, brought balance to the way that I perceive the world. My father is a psychologist, and he was very unusual for a Chinese man because he was also riding around on a motorcycle in the 60s and 70s, and he was doing all kinds of psychedelics and other things, and had a very open mind, let's call it. So when it came to parenting, he would do things like turn me upside down and ask me to look at my actions from another perspective. That I would need to be able to explain to him what was hurtful or harmful or wrong about whatever I did, and then have a plan of correction afterwards. Now, some people respond and say, "Oh my gosh, that's so cruel. He turned you upside down." I loved that part. That part was super fun. Like, that was like going on a ride. It was like being Superman. Like, that part was not punishment, but I felt it very, I guess, degrading and upsetting when I needed to explain to him why what I did was wrong. And particularly, I hated the plan of correction part. So I largely was a very good kid, but I think that helped me to constantly just have the wiring to look at different perspectives all the time and to be able to find ones that were more beneficial. So a lot of the way that I've explored personal growth has been different from what most people do. A lot of people will read every self help book possible, they'll study, they'll watch every TED talk, they'll go to Tony Robbins, all these different things. And I think that's incredible, but it also can create some self-fulfilling prophecies, or you read something and then you start to see it in the world and it's like, did that actually come from me or what? So I've largely avoided that path. I've interacted with a diverse array of people, just been observant about life, going different places, just watching how everything works and putting the pieces together in my mind as much as I can. And then once I came across answers that I felt pretty solid about, then I've started exploring a lot more, getting all, the studying of who has been successful and finding that I have a lot of ideas that already were put out there 50 years ago by people like Alan Watts and Ram Dass, and that helps me to have like a cosign, like, oh, you're not delusional. People who are very well respected have been saying these things too. So that's sort of a lot of the integration. It's living, observing, reflecting, a lot of nights just laying awake thinking about deep topics and the meaning of life and how does the universe work, and getting to a certain point where you're ready to look for confirmation or look at reflections of perspectives that cause you to question or analyze your own at a deeper level.
So we talked a lot about kind of the internal work, and now I kind of want to transition to the external world. And you mentioned how it can be nice to be kind of like Jackie Chan, bouncing from to ascend. You have to kind of bounce back and forth between the internal and the external. And I found that for me, a really big struggle is trusting the external world to, for lack of better words, react or tolerate my presence. If I become what I think is my most authentic self, then I'm going to get rejected. That could be family, that could be friends, that could be romantic partners. So I'm curious, how do you generate trust for the external world in order to show up as your most authentic self? And I'm wondering, how much did, say, like rapping or freestyle rapping play a role in generating that trust?
I love that. So, one of the ways that our fear is right now spiraling out of control that we've already touched on is that it's protecting us from a world where we need to survive and the dangers have dropped drastically. The other way that I think it's also spiraling out of control is in the past, you really needed to be able to fit in with your tribe. And you'd have a small group of people, let's say somewhere between 30, 100, 200 people in your village. And if you rubbed them the wrong way, if you fucked up so everybody thought that you were a detriment to the tribe, they would kick you out and you would have miles and maybe mountains and rivers or things between you and the next group of people. And there's a high probability you get eaten or you starve or you freeze or something and you die. So this overprotective nature, especially when you tie that into generational pain, any sort of remembering of somebody in your family heritage or lineage or in all of society that we get our myths and our stories from, right? there's so much conditioning to say you need to make sure that you are loved by your tribe so you don't die. And that is absolutely not adjusting to how small the world has gotten and how you are able to connect with billions of people from all these different avenues. So if you are rejected by your immediate tribe, or let's say even during this, I would call it spiritual awakening that I've had, I lost a lot of people that have been with me for decades, and family members don't understand me. I got divorced, all these different things happened, and I was able to lose the tribe and find a new tribe. And that helps with a big model that changed the way that I'm able to show up in the world. As I used to think about the world as like a Brita water filter, that every single person you meet is a Brita water filter. And all the people they meet are the water being poured into the top of this Brita water filter. And based on their values of what they think is a cool person, they will either filter somebody in or filter somebody out. And you're just stuck with all the germs and the bacteria and the contaminants, right? The problem with that model is that you have no power and no agency. You have no idea what the filter is or how to get through it. And no matter who you are, let's say you're even Taylor Swift, one of the most popular humans on the planet, guess how many people filter her out, right? So you will always be filtered out. And with our overthinking, fearful minds, right, there's an estimate that the average person has somewhere around 70% of their thoughts each day as fear-based. And we also have estimates that we repeat the same thoughts. The average person has essentially the same thoughts as the day before. About 90 to 95% is the number that's out there. So we wire our brains that way. The longer we live, the more we take that generational pain, have it be a survival mechanism, 70 to 80% of our thoughts each day, fearful to protect ourselves, and then trace those thoughts over and over again, right? Like we're fighting against this really, it's largely an illusion, but these things that cause us to play it small, right? So we got to think about like, okay, how are we going to dissolve that? How are we going to find the perspectives that help us to rewrite these neural pathways and gain access? And freestyle rapping was a really great one because I 100% passed up on opportunities to freestyle rap. Every time there was a cypher, most of the people would be pretty good. And of course, hip hop is an area where, in the past especially, if you sucked, people let you have it. Like it's not a very gentle, nurturing playground for self-expression. So it took me a long time. People would ask me to freestyle. I'd be standing in the circle because I love it and I want to hear everybody. And it gets to my turn and I'm like, nope, I'm not doing it. And it wasn't until I was put on the spot, I was helping to facilitate an online freestyle cipher for the people that used to cipher at the Boom Room during the pandemic. And I would be the host and we would stream it on Twitch. And then people would ask me to freestyle and they'd all start, say, you gotta. And I'm just like, oh, I did. And it was so bad. It was so embarrassing. And then I realized, okay, I better put some time into this because it's going to happen again. And I can't show up that way.
What is it about freestyle rapping? Because you make it sound like you were a little peer pressured into doing it, but it also comes off as a very big passion of yours. Like how did was were you interested in rap and hip hop and then just thought, hey, I want to get more into this flow state, or like because I look at freestyle rap and it's like I couldn't stay far away. I would love to like watch it, but I could never imagine like going up there and like speaking my mind, speaking off the cuff like that. But it seems like even back in the day, you knew there was something to this that really like struck you as something that you wanted to do. Like, what was it about freestyle rap that just stood out to you?
So I never wanted to freestyle rap at all. But hip hop was something I fell in love with in fifth grade and is very much key to the development of my self confidence and my self expression. I heard the song Gangsta's Paradise in fifth grade, and I absolutely loved it. And what I've found now is that my primary interpretation of what hip hop is in all of its elements is it's about transformation. It's about transforming the status quo with revolutionary music like Public Enemy, for example. It's about transforming your body into a worm or a robot or a helicopter in breakdancing, or it's about transforming the side of a train car or side of a building with graffiti. It's about transforming existing songs by DJing and, looping the break beats, all these different things. It's about transforming your life in poverty or your mom's life by buying her a house. And there's all this stuff about transformation. And for me, hip hop has always given a voice to the underdog, the people that are disenfranchised. And I felt like that. I felt like I was an underdog and that I needed to find my voice. So I would rap along to, I would print out all these lyrics from these rap songs that I loved and practice rapping them in my room and pretend to have the confidence of Tupac, pretend to have the confidence of Notorious B.I.G., pretend to have the confidence until I switched from public school to a private Catholic high school. And I had to give a speech to try to get on student government because I needed it for my college applications. How was I going to convince over 300 kids that thought they were better than me, or at least in my mind they did because they were, private school kids, to vote for this dorky Asian public school kid? So I rewrote a verse from a Wu-Tang song that I really like, Triumph, about all the reasons they should vote for me, and put on the persona that I had in my bedroom to rap those lyrics, got on student government. And in all these different moments in my life, like learning how to do karaoke, for example, they helped me to realize, like, oh gosh, you just sang in this room. Like I'd go in college and go to the little Asian spots that you rent with your friends. And sometimes your friends would invite other people. And, the first time one of my friends invited this really pretty girl in there that I never could have talked to, I still did my songs. And then afterwards, I was like, oh my gosh, she heard me rap. She heard me sing. Both those things are worse than my talking. So why am I afraid to talk to her? Like, oh, I already embarrassed myself worse. There's no worse it can get. I guess I could talk to her. So things like that have made the journey a lot more, I guess, pivotal to me, to the point where more and more of my identity has been attached to hip hop as a source of finding my fire, finding my like empowerment. And then it gets to the freestyle point. Like I would write, and I felt like I've always been drawn to poetry. That's actually the number one thing I love about rap. A lot of people love the fashion, the beats, things like that. Very few people are actually drawn to hip hop just because of the lyricism. I was one of those people, and I developed my pen game to the point where it was really strong. I was very confident in my ability to write raps. I knew they were dope, but I had insecurities about my rhythm because my piano teacher used to always chastise me. Is like, you're off beat, use the metronome. And she wouldn't explain it. I just heard this ticking box, and then I see like dots on a paper, and I see buttons in front of me, and I have no idea the connection between any of those things. Like, it was so confusing to me. And she was just like, your rhythm is terrible. So my entire life, I avoided things like dancing because I believed my rhythm was terrible, and I avoided rapping because I assumed my rhythm is terrible. And then I also hated my voice. Everybody, when you hear your voice recorded for the first time, it doesn't sound like what's in your head. I wanted a voice like DMX, and I knew it was far from it. So I was like, I can't rap. And then also back then, I'm already 42. So there weren't examples of Asian Americans that were rapping. We were kind of the exact opposite as the model minority. And I thought that people would think I was a poser and like some kind of culture vulture wannabe. So all those different factors kept me from even being willing to record myself rapping at all or to rap my own lyrics in front of anybody. So getting over that hump was huge. But then the ability to improvise and to freestyle, something that seemed completely impossible, on top of that, that took another, I don't know, 10 years for me to face that hurdle after the first time I recorded myself rapping on a song.
I love hearing that journey. That is amazing. I really just loved hearing that. I had no idea. music plays a role, I think, in everyone's lives, but to hear how empowering it was for you and how it was a system by which you could learn and grow creatively and just as a person, that's the transformation, like you said. That's amazing.
Yeah, very much so. And one other thing that's really helpful is one of the times when I was feeling really confident and really good about myself, I wrote something that I then could use later on, sort of like a mantra. You know, a lot of people go in front of a mirror and repeat a few simple lines like, I am strong, I am confident, I am whatever it is. Well, if you could really make something dope out of that so that it's a lot deeper and a lot more meaningful to you, and be able to recite that. So there'd be times where I would feel pressure to maybe go on a podcast, for example. And it's like, how do I pump myself up? I'm feeling so much imposter syndrome. I'm feeling panic. I'm feeling anxiety, all those different things. Well, I could go in my car and just the way that I used to rap along to Tupac and other things in my room to bump up my confidence, I could do it. But it's like a message that's really near and dear to me. And it's actually, yeah, me at my best, you know? You rap that a couple times and all of a sudden you're feeling like a champion and you can go do it. And then you get to a point like today where you've done it enough that you don't have to do that. You just say, okay, I'm going to get my yerba mate and I'm going to walk in the door and I'm going to talk.
Can you share like an example of a mantra or like
I can
a
share the particular piece that I'm thinking of. It's called Limitless. And that's what I want to empower people in this workshop to be. I spent so much of my life not taking any risks, not taking any chances, putting limits on myself. Like I put my own glass ceiling and I put it so low that I was pretty much limboing through life. And to raise that roof or to take it off completely was the goal. So I wrote this piece called Limitless. It's time to confess. The truth's been held close to breast. I profess to be the best, but it's always just in jest. Couldn't stomach myself, just junk food I ingest. GQ in a vest? Never cared how I dressed. That's authentically me, not a source of distress. But what about all the rest that's been left unexpressed? My essence repressed, I suppressed all the zest, jest, quirkiness, lest be branded a pest, constantly acquiesced due to self-consciousness. Good Lord, I'd be a mess if you said I transgressed. No authenticity, the process left me depressed. I spy a mistaken identity north by northwest. My soul request, it's time this gets addressed. Insecurities protest, but I progress nevertheless. My money I digest, in myself I invest. Transfiguration, I am legion, a man possessed. One with the power to transform, like the alchemist. Call me Max Holloway, I'm absolutely blessed. Watch me rock it, Bradley Cooper. There's no contest. I manifest greatness that's limitless.
damn.
Yeah, so that piece, like that's one thing that's about fear is like you don't shove it away, you don't try to erase it, you face it, you keep it there as kind of like the other side of the yin yang, right? So the piece starts out with a lot of the things that I've been criticized for or things that I feel like are insecurities. And then it talks about how do you go through this process of transmutation and then turn it into strength and power. So that would be the perfect mantra for me because I would be caught in some kind of self-doubt, usually one of those patterns about like, oh yeah, a lot of people criticize me because they think I'm overweight and that I should exercise more and that I eat too much junk food, or they don't like the way that I dress, or all these different things that I'm afraid of showing up. And then it's like, all right, that's nonsense. Let's accept that it's there, but hey, let's shine.
I want to give a shout out to the workshop that you're doing here. And I'm just going to read a little bit. It's called The Empowered Self, A Journey Through Fear to Authentic Expression. It's going to be at Heart Lab on February 18th at 7 p.m. We'll have a link on the podcast. Can you share a little bit more about what folks are going to be doing at the workshop? Like, how should they come in? Do they need to prepare at all? Or do they need to think creatively about anything? Or is it just show up and just be ready to rock?
So, one of the things that my friend Rob Wong, who was my coach for a while, really taught me was that showing up is a superpower. He did a TEDx talk about how masculinity is causing men to like kill themselves. And, he had to go through the same journey as a Chinese American man that I've had to go through. And he helped me to believe that, just showing up is important. So as long as you show up to the workshop, that's like 90% of the journey right there. And you'll get out of it whatever you're ready to get out of it. And I would say that to think about, there's different kinds of fear, and we'll talk about that a bit as well. There is fear that is legitimate survival protection. But most of the fear that we experience these days, because, like I said, our survival is not necessarily in danger every moment, is more of a threshold type fear, something that protects us by keeping us in a comfort zone. It protects us from the unknown. And that's the kind of fear that is probably overcorrecting and really providing limits more than protection. So, to think about those areas, like if you were able to show up as your authentic self, like what I realized is that until recently, I was not actually allowing my true self to live in different scenarios, whether I was teaching in front of my class, or I was around my childhood friends, or I was around my hip hop friends. I just put on different masks that I never actually got to be myself. And then I realized if I'm doing that, how many people are actually spending more of their lives as a character, as a masked version of themselves, than as themselves? So I would say to reflect on the ways that you mask yourself, the ways that you feel like, I would love to be able to show up like this. I would love to be more silly. I'd love to be more playful. I'd love to be more aggressive, more assertive, whatever it might be, the ways that we kind of tone ourselves down. And think about those. Think about which fears are causing you to play it small and not take a chance that will actually potentially unlock the life of your dreams. And we'll go from there.
Why have you been interested in teaching? Like, what drew you to teaching?
I fell in love with the idea of being a teacher. I was an elementary school teacher for 14 years because my parents would not let me stay at home. And I was in sixth grade. And at the daycare center at the school, there was only one other sixth grader, and the vast majority of kids there were kindergarteners and first graders. And I hated the other sixth grader that was there. So it was like torture and the greatest embarrassment to be in that space. So I asked my sixth grade teacher, who happened to be an Asian male in his very first year of teaching, Mr. Sakamoto, if I could stay with him after school every day and just help him instead of going to the daycare center. It saved my parents money, it saved me embarrassment. And the more I did that, the more I fell in love with it. And it put me on this path so that now I feel like my calling is essentially I aspire to be a bodhisattva, which is a lofty thing to say, but it's the type of Buddha that reaches enlightenment and does not stay there in nirvana and in peace, just meditating on a mountain, but comes back to the village to show others a path there. And that's really what drives me to learn more. I didn't go on this self help kind of self actualization journey with myself as the primary person that I was trying to do it for. It was realizing that I was having a very positive impact on my students by teaching these personal growth and life lessons, all things that I wish somebody taught me when I was growing up as this model minority in Fremont. And then seeing a lot of success and then realizing I'm limited in what I can teach them by what I actually know, understand, and embody. So I better go out there and learn more so I can teach more. And that's what the last few years have really been about. I quit my teaching job to be able to create an education program to fill in the gaps in our current system and have been on a journey to learn as much as possible such that I feel worthy of a title like being a bodhisattva. And yeah, I feel like I've gone far enough that I don't have all the answers, but it's time for me to start sharing what I've learned And in seeing it have a positive impact for people, like anybody that I'm able to help in this workshop, I will have more proof of concept to be able to bring to my education program and help a lot of young people.
That's great. I feel like when I was a little kid, I would have really appreciated concepts of personal growth, being in touch with my body, meditation, just feel coming back to myself a little bit. I think it would have been extremely important for both self-regulation as well as self-image. And so I really applaud you for bringing that type of awareness and these types of tools to a broader population. And I've got a 3-year-old son. You might be able to tell from all the toys in the room here. I'm trying to instill that in him. And I also still feel like there's this parental reflex that's built on generational conditioning. It's like, oh,
Yes.
don't yell, don't express your emotions too loudly in this
Yes.
public place. That's not right, even though what is right? That's completely subjective. You're not allowed to throw a tantrum here. You know, you're weak if you throw a tantrum, if you cry out. And so, you talk about the yin and yang. It's kind of like I have, I've done some work on myself. I've done some work with my partner. We have some awareness in some of these tools. And also, it's like that generational conditioning is also pushing back. And so it's always like a bit of a tug, a bit of a push and pull there. And so I'm really glad that you're bringing some of these tools and education awareness to a younger population. So that's awesome.
Yeah, when I hear you say that, it makes me think of a wonderful quote from a philosopher that that had a transformative impact on me. Jiddu Krishnamurti. I'm trying to pull up this exact quote here so I can get it right. My internet is going very slowly.
Also, the internet here is terrible, but I could pull it up. You can look on my browser since I'm connected to the Wi-Fi here.
Yeah.
So Krishnamurti is awesome.
Yes. Awesome.
Yeah, I've literally got a book of his on my bedstand right
Oh,
now.
amazing. How did you come across Krishnamurti?
Yeah, that was totally random. I was at a bookstore in Hong Kong of all places, and there was just a used book, and there was just like this brown dude on there. I'm like, what's this all about? This must be just like some random guru book. And something about his teachings just like it just hit me like a bag of bricks. Just the way he's talking about systems of thinking and how it's like even if you think you're outside the system, you're still within a system. And so just something about how he communicates just resonated with me, just shone like a light. And so I always come back to him. He's amazing.
It's so funny because I discovered Krishnamurti because of a rap song.
It's
Yeah. It was a song called Here For You by the late great rapper Idea from Minneapolis. And in that song, I heard more of a resonance than I had exploring all these different religious establishments. Like anywhere I was invited to go, from Muslim masjids to Jehovah Witness kingdom halls. I went to Catholic school, Buddhist temples. I'd always hear something that made sense to me and then something that didn't. And then I heard this song, and everything from there was like more me than anything I could even write myself. And I went on genius.com to go research the lyrics. And in the beginning, it was talking about how Idea was greatly influenced by Jiddu Krishnamurti. And I was like, if this song is resonating with me at this level, I need to go find out who this guy is. So here's the quote that matches what you were saying about how generational pain and all the social conditioning, the social norms of what we raise our children in may actually be detrimental, right? So he said, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And I think most of us would agree that there are a lot of ways that our society is not very healthy right now. And a lot of the time, we are so conditioned to believe that we need to fit into the way that our society functions, but also we know that it's a very sick society. So why are we following the conditioning? Why not take a chance? Why not try expressing ourselves in a way that hasn't been done before? Because that's the only way that we're going to find the solutions. You can't solve a problem from within the thinking of what created that problem. And I think that's largely what we're trying to do. And I think we have the potential to skyrocket very rapidly. I think over the last 4 years, the type of growth I've experienced personally is hard for many to conceive in a lifetime, but it's accessible to all of us as long as we just take the limits off of our own thinking and are not afraid to, maybe not be tethered to the ground by the people around us who may think that those ways of thinking are dangerous or delusional, but to really realize that, as far as we can tell, there is no objective reality. And we only perceive a trillionth of the visual spectrum, and we build like 70% or more of our concept of what is true and what is real from what we see. And even with a lot of the things that we know are true, we might be basing them off of one traumatic memory. So our sample size to have something that we believed and traced the thoughts of for our entire life may be one failure out of one, right? And you do that same thing 5 times, you might have a couple successes in there, but we're really basing it off of a very small sample size, and we're very young and we're very sensitive and we're very conditioned. So, let's see what we can do and see what we can rewrite, and that's what the workshop is all about.
That kind of brings me back to what you were saying before about how you believed you were a shy introvert, and then you
Mm-hmm.
go back and literally watch the tapes, and here you are, a 2-year-old who's like running around
Yeah.
and wanting to interact and connect and be in community and such. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's funny how our perception can be warped or shifted, and then we see like perhaps actual real world evidence of what's actually happening.
Yes. And underneath everything, I really believe in neuroplasticity. If we could write our brains to shift, from being a joyful, social, just bubbly, fun, playful kid into not realizing that we were ever that, and just feel like, oh my gosh, I've always been the shyest, quietest, most fearful, most restricted, boring, all that. I can rewrite it the other direction as well, and I can rewrite it in all these other ways. So, yeah, let's do that.
Anything else you'd like to add, Chi? Anything else that we didn't touch on here?
That feels pretty complete, I think. Yeah, there's definitely a lot more, and I'm excited to share that in the workshop where we will be able to interact with each other in ways that, oh, that's a big thing too. So many of us have read all these self-help books, have watched, master classes, and have all this information, and we largely logically understand it. But even the most logical of us still makes all of our decisions and our actual actions and behaviors off of emotional signals in our brain. So a lot of it is about taking the knowledge that we've acquired and finding a way to alchemize it into action by experiencing something emotional. So when we come together and we share our stories and we connect on a human level, it's going to be able to take a lot of the things that I've said during this podcast that you can understand at a logical level and help to transition it to emotional understanding, which will lead to action. And then that repeated action will lead to embodiment until it becomes what we've traced over and over again in our repeated thinking into just a way of being.
I might cut this part of the podcast out, but
Cool.
I'm just going to ask this because that's really fascinating. Because I think my structure, my framework had been logical understanding leads to action. And you've added an element that I wasn't aware of, this emotional awareness or emotional action, the alchemizing with emotion. What do you mean by that? How does that, what, how does emotion come into play so much? And I think I hear an alarm here.
That's a phone call
Oh,
that
okay.
I'm receiving.
Did you want to take that? I could.
I do not need to take it. I
Okay.
will call them back.
How does emotion play into that dynamic of logic, learning, action? What role does emotion play there?
Yeah, I would say that logic is kind of like giving yourself fuel. It's like stockpiling wood. You have all these rational actions that you can take, but you can't cook anything with that wood until you are able to set it on fire. So I would say that it's kind of like the catalyst. For example, me. I largely enjoy eating junk food that's unhealthy. I have all the logical understanding about how vegetables are better for me, but I get a much stronger emotional reaction when I'm eating ice cream than when I'm eating a Brussels sprout. And then the moment that a doctor tells me you're going to die in 3 years if you don't stop eating ice cream and start eating Brussels sprouts, then my emotional response to that is going to outweigh the emotional response generated by the ice cream. And then all of a sudden, you'll see people take years and years of bad behavior that they tried to change with dieting or whatever other ways of logical understanding, and they will act on it. So that's one thing that I've noticed is that some people think it takes a long time to change this behavior or change this way of thinking. That's only true if you protect yourself from feeling emotional responses, which most of us do. So, the proportion of how much you allow yourself to experience your emotions or do things that will trigger a much riskier emotional response with more emotional gravity, more pain if you fail, more joy if you succeed, you can grow and evolve very rapidly that way because it is like the fire to take that logical fuel and put it into action.
But gee, I don't want to experience my emotion. Come on. I don't want more emotions. I want fewer emotions.
I feel that.
Chi, thanks so much for coming in. I really
Yeah.
appreciate this conversation. And
Yeah, I feel like that would be a really great fear to bring into the workshop. Anybody that is afraid to feel their emotions, that is definitely not a protective fear. That is a threshold fear. So if we can get you into that threshold and then taking your step through the door, you can experience an entire different reality.
oh, I know it's a threshold fear,
Hmm.
but I am scared of stepping out of that threshold fear into the unknown. I'm
Yes,
more scared of the unknown than my threshold fear because I know what my threshold fear is. So
that's what the workshop's for. Yes,
thanks so much, Chi.
yes.